All right, if you want to follow along, I guess opening up Rstudio would be a good start if everyone's downloaded it and all that jazz. Just let me know if you have trouble getting it open. So this is just one of my projects. So if yours doesn't look like this, obviously that's okay. Don't stress. If you only have 3 panes, that's also okay. Don't stress, like it doesn't matter. But if you can follow along, I thought it would be good if I open one of my projects and you kind of see what it looks like when you're, actually doing some work. So there's a few objectives or goals or questions, I guess, for today. The first is how to find your way around Rstudio, which is an IDE, an integrated development environment, not an IDE. So learning how to interact with that environment. So, coding in R and interacting with Rstudio. How to manage your environment, and then also how to install packages, which is kind of where the strength of R is, at least in my opinion. So the first thing I guess we'll go through are the 4 different panes that we have here. You might not have this here. If you're opening like a blank Rstudio, you can just open up a script by clicking on this. And if you open up a script, it should open this pane. If it doesn't, how do I get rid of that? Oh, cool. If you still can't see all your panes, you can go to View, Panes, Show All Panes, and you'll be able to see all 4, right? And so I'll just go through and describe what each of the panes do, right? So down here we have our console and our terminal and jobs. So this pane really, the console is for writing code in R, right? So within this environment, whereas the terminal underneath is interacting with your computer. So if you've done any stuff with like Bash, I guess if you're working with, whether you're working with Apple or Windows, it's going to be a bit different. Like I have it set up so I can change it to Bash and code in Bash. So you can interact with your computer through here if you're into that. You don't need to do that. A lot of people don't ever use the terminal because you have this other pane over here, right? So this pane here has all the files, plots that I've created, packages that I've installed for Rstudio, all located in this pane. So you can sort of flick through and see all the different things. Packages aren't coming up, maybe the computer's going a bit slow. And then help is like once you start interacting with R a bit more, you can start asking for help and really for different functions and packages. And these will all turn up in this little pane here, which is super handy. With the plots, I might just, if I actually just show you how that looks. So when you plot something in your console, oh, that's not what I had intended. It'll come up, it's a bit slow because it's a bit of a complicated plot, but it'll come up in this little pane here. So this is another way of like viewing your plots. And then from there, you'll be able to export them. You can zoom in, you can flick back and forth between plots. But this is obviously something that we'll interact with a bit further down in this course. Eventually a plot will be made, you can see it, but everything seems to be running a bit slow. So until that comes up, we'll go into this other pane up here, which has your environment, your history and connections. And then mine has Git. Yours might not have Git if you haven't installed Git. That doesn't matter. We'll probably address that at a way later date. But Git will just allow you, so for version control, so you can upload all your code to GitHub and have copies of everything you write up there. And the last little pane, the last pane here is the editor. There's some pretty plots for some variant calling annotation, if anybody's interested in that, which you're probably not. But so this is where all our scripts are. Once we get to markdown files, that's where our markdown files will be. And this is essentially where you can write code that you then save, right? And so then it's saved within your environment, which we can actually start doing now. But before we get into that, something I should have started with, something that I was taught like way at the start was like anytime you start, not just a new like PhD project, but I have projects for our club and for work and all these different things. And a project essentially like you're creating a folder on your computer that contains everything you want for that project, right? So it will contain, when you open it, it'll open this environment. It'll have all the files in the right directory, and it just makes it easier to interact and sort of contain everything you want to use for a particular project. And to create a new project, you just go to File. So you can follow along here if you like, and we're going to create like an art club project that we then use for the next few weeks for our course. So your File, New Project. Ignore my warning. Get a new directory. A directory is just a folder. That really kind of pissed me off at the start, if I'm honest. But anyway, new project, and then directory name, and then wherever you want to save it, right? So I kind of have this folder data where I literally have all my projects, but you can save it wherever you want. And we can call it, let's call it intro course. Simple as that. Create project. Just a bit slow again. Sorry, it might be that my current project is a bit big, and so it takes a while to open and close. But it'll happen eventually. Here we go. It'll probably open up with 3 panes as well. So if you don't know what I was talking about, yeah. So we don't have any scripts or anything. We have a completely empty environment. You saw that mine was full of different objects and variables. The only file we have is our project file, and so that's what you will click on to open this environment again. Like I said, so no other files, but we can create a file. And so we can go create a script. It opens up this thing in our editor, like a script, and that's where we can write code. So there's 2 sort of workflows or ways you can interact with R, and one is through the console, and one is with scripting, right? And once we get to packages, we'll be able to use a lot more complicated functions and cool stuff like that. But just to sort of like demonstrate like what we can do. So we can interact with the console, just doing some basic sort of arithmetic, but it can also be done in our script. And if you're on a Windows, you can just Control Enter at the correct line and it'll run it in your console. If you're on Mac, I'm guessing it's Command Enter, but I could be wrong, but feel free to play around with that. But then we can save these scripts, right? And it opens up our project that we just created, super easy. And we can call it whatever we want. So today is, I don't remember what was the name of the course today? Let's say intro day 1 or something. And then you see it pops up in your file browser down here. And so like once it's gone, then you can just easily reopen it. And you'll find that once you have like a lot of scripts, you'll create new directories within this sort of parent directory. And that can contain scripts and outputs and all these things. And so it's super easy to navigate in here. So scripting versus console. Well, I guess I sort of already went over that. So the strength of the script is that essentially you're saving your code. When you write stuff in the console, which I've had with people before, it disappears when you close it and then we can reopen it, right? So the script will keep it all in there. It won't keep your outputs. Once we start using R Markdown, that will keep your outputs within that file, but scripting doesn't. Another cool, handy thing about scripts is, well, maybe it's not cool and handy, but it's handy. It's super useful, and that's like commenting. So adding annotation to your scripts so you know exactly what you've done. You may think in the moment that it's super simple, maybe even stupid to write an annotation for something, but trust me, like once you step away from something for a few weeks or a few months and you come back to it, it's not simple anymore. Like you have to think that when you're working in R, especially if you're doing analysis day after day, you're kind of in that zone, like things just click. But when you step away and you write a paper for a few weeks and you come back, it's not the same. So it's super cool just to be able to write 5 times 5. So maybe that's not the kind of annotation you want, but when you get more complicated code, it could be like describing why you use a particular function at a certain point, or the different packages, or the package versions, right? Because packages are going to change in their versions. And if you have a script that's a few years old and it's on an older package, and then you go to use it, the new package, it might not work. So having those versions annotated as well can be super helpful. And if you can't figure out any of this stuff as well, Google is the way to go. So right now we haven't used any functions, but there are a few that we'll go through. So, I mean, one of the basics things with R, I guess, is like basic arithmetic, things that you can do. Like I said, like 5 times 5, or you can do like, well, not question mark, you know, divisions. You can sort of do any of that stuff, but this, I guess that's sort of the basics of R, but then there's also base R functions. They're like mathematical arithmetic, and it extends beyond that, also with like reading in files and things like that, installing and loading packages. But just sticking with basic arithmetic, you can use things like log and sine, and it's all sort of contained in R. You can also do like comparisons. So it's 10 equal to 11, and if false, so it returns a Boolean value, true or false. You have to use 2 equals because it's for 1 equals is for assignment. So there's these not stupid but annoying little rules when getting started that might not make sense until you start to understand that those symbols are used for other things in other contexts, I guess, within R. You can also do things like, is 1 not equal to 1, right? False, right? So super basic, but I guess it hopefully just gives you an idea of what R is capable of at a basic level and how to interact with it. You can also obviously, I would say, make a habit of saving everything all the time. What else? So variables. So if we, like I was saying before, so the script doesn't keep your outputs unless you save those outputs, right? And you save those as a variable. So I can save like this output. Let's call it, I don't know. I have no idea what to call it. Let's call it Jacob for now, just because I'm the man of the hour. So, and then so essentially, like you can print the output. So essentially, you're saving whatever the contents or the results are of that code as a variable under a certain name. So it's kind of like creating like a file that will always be in your global environment unless you get rid of it. And to get rid of it, you can clear out objects from workspace by using this little sweepy fella. With naming of variables, Jacob is obviously a terrible name for a variable because it doesn't actually describe the output, right, or what was done. So it's really good practice to make sure your variables sort of align with that. So the example that they gave in the workshop was X. X is a terrible thing to save any variable as, right? Because you may, like, X is the first thing that comes to mind. So how often are you going to do that? So you're going to be overriding your own variables. So like if I make that Jacob, but then I just want to make Jacob 10 now, it changes the contents of that variable. So if you make it sort of mundane names that don't have any meaning, 1, you run the risk of overriding your old variables. And then 2, you have no idea what's in there. And when you start dealing with more complex objects, that definitely becomes a bit of an issue for sure. Cool. Another power of variables is that you can then insert them into functions, right? So like that log function here, you can then run, let's log Jacob. And it gives us the log of whatever the contents of Jacob was, right? And that sort of brings us to functions. So functions are essentially, the way I like to think about it is they're a collection of code that someone that's a lot smarter than me has written. Essentially, that's what it is, right? And so a good example, if we run ls, I mean, we could also run that up here. So I'm sort of just going back and forth because I haven't really thought about it too much. But you could run this code either in the console or in your scripts. So if we run this ls without our parentheses or without our brackets, instead of running the function, it shows us the contents of what's in this function. And as you can see, it's essentially a collection of, of code. And so that's what's happening when you run these functions. It's essentially saying, run this code on this variable. right? Or this string, which is a collection of letters, or this numeric value, or what have you. You don't need to know what all this code does, right? For the most part, most of the functions we use, until you start writing your own, we don't really know what's going on under the hood. If you want to be someone that's writing their own packages and stuff in the future, then maybe it's good to understand that. But at this point in time, you don't really need to know what the functions are doing. Other rules for naming functions, you can't have spaces. R doesn't like spaces. I guess, I don't know what it's like in other languages. Some other languages are probably more flexible with that. Yeah, within names, it is not, but like between names. So if it's within like a command, like I could write, so it's not going to like something like that, right? Oops, sorry. So I'm going to make a lot of errors, and that's normal. So that's another thing. Don't be scared of making errors. I can't have spaces in there, but I can have underscores or whatever else I want. You can use periods. I would recommend not using periods, just because when you start moving, if you want to expand to other languages, like things like Python, periods have different meanings. Like they're actually used for functionality. And so if you get in the habit of using them in R when you go to other languages, it's just not a good idea. But the spaces, yeah, sorry. So although within the names, like you can't use spaces, R is really flexible in that, like having all these other spaces, like it doesn't matter. Like you still get the same output. So that's kind of handy. Like you will get a lot of syntax issues, or like how you write your code issues. So you leave out a comma or a parentheses or something like that. But for whatever reason, I don't know why. Watama might, because he seems to know everything. Doesn't mind you using these massive spaces. Obviously, maybe don't. Like just use enough space to make it nice and easy to read.
I don't know if you actually want me to tell you, but
yeah, go for it.
It's just the way that R extracts expressions. So the white spaces don't mean anything. So you could have it when you extract an expression from it and then deparse it, which is like kind of what happens in R under the hood. That white space is just removed, really. So it's more like it's visualize it. It's for the aesthetics, basically, is the reason. Yeah.
Cool. There you go. I told you, know. Sweet. Thanks, Watama. What else? So vectorization. So one of the strengths of R, and I guess maybe languages like Python as well, which Watama could talk about again at some other point, is vectorization. So R is vectorized, which means variables can have multiple values contained within it. I think I had what R actually defines as a vector. In R, vector is a set of values of the same data type, right? So it doesn't have to be in a variable. So a vector could be anything like, 1 through 5, that's a vector. But we could also say that as and so we have this vector that contains multiple values. And that's obviously important when we start dealing, like for people like us and scientists, when we start dealing with more complex data in your tables and matrices and data frames, right? The idea is that R can handle these things with multiple values inside of them. And a lot of the functions you will use, even like the basics of R, like writing things like loops and things like that, they sort of rely on this concept. And then when you get to more complicated functions and different packages you'll use for your specific analyses, they also heavily rely on this concept. I guess there's probably not too much we need to talk about, except that you can, I guess, use vectors, so objects that contain multiple values, for whether you're defining variables or you're just interacting with R. Cool. Managing the environment. So I showed you this pane over here. This has things like files, plots, packages. Eventually mine will load with a whole heap of packages. If you've just started Rstudio, you'll have a lot less. One way of interacting with your packages, so you can obviously just seeing what they are, installing them, removing them, is through this pane. But I mean, go for it if you want. That's up to you. But we are coding, so it's like let's write code, right? Let's actually have some fun with it. And so if you want to see what packages you have, you can use this sort of. Oh, it's not packages. Sorry, that's global environment. Install packages. you can use functions like this, install packages, which will give me eventually a whole list of all the packages. And I think in their versions as well, potentially whether or not they're loaded, I'm not sure. So it's just another way of doing things. So the ls, which I stupidly use, is actually for your global environment. So that'll tell us what things or values are in here. So again, you can interact with your global environment through this pane, but you can also do it through the console. And you'll find that once you have a lot more values within here, it maybe it's a bit harder to navigate. So you can, interact with it through the console. You can also remove things from the environment using remove. Or if you want to delete all of them, like I said, you can also use this little sweeper up here. If you have multiple things in your environment and you also want to keep writing code because it's fun instead of using the pane, you can also do things like this to remove everything. So there are ways to interact with RStudio, I guess, both through the console and using your keyboard or through using a mouse. I don't actually have a mouse, and that's probably why I prefer to use the keyboard, because when you have a laptop and you're traveling around, it doesn't make sense to have a mouse, in my opinion. But anyway, that's pretty not important. But yes, getting into packages. So packages, like I said, functions are essentially a collection of code contained within a variable. A package is another layer on top of that. It's a collection of functions essentially, right? So I guess it's kind of like a little, directory that contains a whole heap of code that may be specific to a type of analysis or a different type of wrangling, or for package management, which is one I'll touch on in a second. And so I guess it's another strength of R, right? Having like really smart people write these really cool packages that are super handy. And so we don't have to write really basic things with lots of square brackets and commas and crap like that. What else? And so if we're going to interact with it in the console or within our script, there's a few things we can do, a few things that we should know. So the first one I alluded to before was install packages, and this will give us a list of all the packages that are installed. If we want to install a package, we use install packages, right? I should actually mention here, you'll have to put them in quotations when installing. But when you want to load stuff, don't put it in quotations. I mean, White-Armor could probably correct me here again, but I think because when you're installing, it's looking for a string that matches a particular package to install, whereas library tidyverse, you use a package that's already installed, so it doesn't need to recognize a string, something like that. Could be talking out my ass, but anyway, so yeah. So what else with packages? And you'll see, like, once you load everything, it's going to give you some information and some warnings, which is always fun. One thing I will, I won't linger on here, but one package I will recommend you install is one called Bairos Manager. Bairos Manager is something I think probably written by or made by the guys at Bioconductor. But just to be aware of this package now, if you install it and then you load it, whenever I have issues installing packages in R, or when other people have issues installing packages to R and they ask me to help them out, a lot of the times using Bairos Manager install will solve that problem. It's just whatever they've written into the package makes it a lot easier. It can deal with version issues and compatibility issues and dependency issues that we don't have to think about. And so it makes life a whole lot easier. That would be poor spelling, and that would be. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's capital B, capital N. I will double check that for you. Yeah. Another thing I should mention, when using packages, there are a couple of ways, I guess, you can sort of, or you can use them, right? One thing is you can start loading all the packages you want to use at the start of your script. Like you could have like, oh, I want to have the tidyverse load it up. I also think I need Bairos Manager because I'm going to be installing some stuff or what have you. But another way, if you don't want to load all the packages, another way of doing it is Bairos Manager : So these columns just say, we want to use this function that comes from this package. Just if you're only using it for like one instance, then sometimes it's not necessary to load it. And then you'll find that within a lot of packages, because the functions are just variables, and like I was talking about before, like if you start calling all your variables X, you're going to start overriding things. So different packages may have the same names for particular variables or for particular functions. And so one will sort of be the dominant version. And so if you load two packages and they have a function has the same name, one will be used. And if you're trying to use the other package's function, it's not going to work. And so to specify it here, it's just a lot easier. So either you don't load it, or if you know there are two packages with the same names, and you specify the package like this. So with colon. I've encountered this more so within the tidyverse with things like dplyr and plyr and things like that. Another good package to load or install now if you don't have this tidyverse. We'll probably end up using that quite a bit in the next few weeks, but I mean, we can get into it then. What else? I actually don't have anything else. I went through that a lot quicker than I thought I would. But I guess, are there any questions? It's probably a good time to start asking if anyone has any questions. It is, I guess today is really just like a basic introduction to the environment and recognizing, well, not recognizing the power, but I guess like just seeing how to interact with it on a basic level. And then in the next few weeks, like we will start to build on this, but really just being comfortable with how Rstudio looks, and how it works is probably the first step, because it can be intimidating. I was pretty intimidated. You open this thing up and it's like you're running code in one spot, you have files in another, you have your global environment. It can be a bit much, but just play around with it, have some fun. What's on
Can you show everyone how to put dark mode on to see if they're on?
I don't even remember.
Yeah, I know. I can never remember.
Yeah.
I've been trying to work it out.
Are in global options. So tools, global options, appearance.
Wait, how do you get
Okay. We're going to start again for Kat. No, joking. No, joking. So tools,
Yeah.
global options, appearance, and then you can, choose your theme, fonts, and then this stuff down here. There's a whole heap. I'm pretty sure you can even download other ones if you don't like them. I prefer blackout because it doesn't have this white light shining in my face. But I actually learned the other day that's worse for my eyes. And my eyes have gotten progressively worse over the course of my PhD and now working. And they did suggest that it's probably because at least in part, they didn't do a study on it, but that it might, using blackout and everything might not be a great idea. But, it looks super sick, so go for it. Yeah. Do you use blackout in VS Code by Tyler?
Yeah. For me, actually, my eyes don't hurt as much, I guess. Like if it's very bright, especially if you're in like a dark environment, you don't need bright background at all.
I agree.
Yeah.
I found like intense, like shining.
Yeah. Can be, especially if you're like doing a lot of coding, like you're doing an analysis for like 8 hours or something like that. Another good thing is to like get some eye drops and also like turn away and blink and stuff, like there can be a lot of dangers like working in R for extended periods. So be careful.
I concur.
Blinking is encouraged. But people don't. That's what happens. People just don't blink. So if you're working on analysis, people stop blinking for like hours. It's a real problem. So you got to make sure you're thinking about that.
Yes, can't go with your game, man.
Where's the ampir?
I guess, we all have our preferences, but I tend to dislike good packages. So.
Rude.
No, I haven't needed it yet, Legana. So Legana is one of these really bright people, like my Tama. She wrote her own package. So if you want to use it, go for it.
Doing antimicrobial peptide prediction. What are you doing, Jake?
Yeah. It's not niche or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone here?
Yeah. So you said we got to make a folder and it saves everything into that folder.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean like when we do our data for like our experiments, we need to save that in that folder, or can we still have it saved?
You can
in
have it
its
saved
own-
wherever you want on your
Okay.
computer, but it is so much easier if you contain everything in one little project. So like if
Then I should like save the
I mean, it's up to you. Like for my projects, like I will have, like besides the data backed up, like on my computer, I will have all the data for that project in that project, like directly. It's just so much easier. Like you'll when you start loading stuff in. So I'm just going to stop sharing and share again, just to give an example. Go for it. No. If you in your previous session, if you had those scripts open, you will open them. If you didn't, you won't turn them. But that's why you just have everything in your project, and it'll be down in that sort of that pane on the bottom right. So I will now share. So this is for an actual project that I'm working on, and it is a bit of a mess, I'm going to be honest. But essentially like how I tend to set it up. Oh shit. My battery's running low. You probably didn't see that. Hopefully it'll hold out for a little while longer. Like I'll have like a data directory where I have all my data. I don't know who's doing Git next week.
Yeah, Legana is doing it next week. Git is in the next one, but I think it will be part of the process to install it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so mine's a bit messy, but look, I have this sort of data directory where I keep all my data, and that's all the data for actually most of this project is on the HPC. So this is just the data.
Did your mic die? Oh, his laptop's battery's dead.
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Yeah, it was a close call. We can't hear you.
I'm pretty sure I had full.
You're
I'm
back.
still here. It
What?
might shut down again, so I apologize. But yeah, just so I have this my parent directory now. Like I'll have my scripts and everything for this. Oh Jesus. Yeah. You're right.
Trying to be helpful.
Contained
Turned out I'm hindering.
in one project. And this is probably not the best example, but yes, I would recommend storing your data within that directory. And then wherever else you back it up, it's fine. But having two copies of the same data on your computer, not handy, not helpful, especially when, if you're using R and you start, crunching big numbers and using big data sets, it's going to slow your computer down, and the more data you have on there, it can cause a bit of an issue. So I would say keep your computer as clean as possible and just have one set of data on there. If you already have a data sort of directory, have all your data, then you can set up your project so that it's close to that, and then it's easy to link across. But you'll find that like when you're because my data directory is within my project directory, when I want to read in some data, it's really easy to write the file path because it's like parent directory data filtering. If it's in a completely different spot, like you might have to write the full path, right? And that can be a pain in the ass, especially when you're trying to write neat code. And if you want to create nice, pretty PDFs that have your code so people can follow it later, and you have these huge file paths that has like Jacob is awesome _ PhD or something, like it doesn't help like at all. So I would definitely recommend, but that's like subjective and personal, I think.
And I think next week, Legana will also go through more project management stuff as part of the talk. Go over that in more detail.
Yeah, it sounds like you need our tools for sure. Just on that though, if you're using OneDrive and you have everything automatically syncing, you may run into some issues when you're installing packages. So you might have like 2 libraries. You might end up with one in your OneDrive and one in your local. And when you start to interact with R, there'll be like packages in either one and it becomes a bit of a headache. It's up to you how you want to deal with it. But I just essentially started doing everything on my local machine. And I've recommended that to other people because I've encountered that problem quite a few times now. And sorry, just when you're on OneDrive as well, like generally like you can get access to administration rights, but I have had struggle with that in the past. So I guess just be aware if you're running into stuff like that.
What if you do work across multiple computers? I've got my uni computer and then I've got my laptop for at home.
Well, then make sure everything's going into your OneDrive. So it's like either do everything there or have different like things set up across different computers, and make sure you have administration rights. Yeah.
And then if you are working across multiple computers, like say you save your project on your OneDrive, can you then get into trouble if you use your R on one computer and then your R on your computer later? Like,
but your project's in your OneDrive.
Yeah.
No, it should be fine. Like if you got access to your OneDrive across multiple computers, like
so he doesn't care which
Rstudio
it's done in.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
No. So it's like so the project you create is essentially this file here, right? It is like this entire directory, but like as long as you have this file and the associated files, it's okay. And this is your data file for anyone who's wondering, which is like this environment here. If you ever lose your environment, you can just click on that. It'll restore it. So yeah.
Then like hypothetically, if your laptop broke and I had to use yours, can I then open up my project from my OneDrive on your?
I wouldn't let you.
No, but like you can open it up on another computer as long as they've got R. Like, doesn't matter.
No. So I would say the only issue there that you might run into is just like versioning. So like different like packages or different versions. So if you've written all your scripts in one version package, like I was saying, if you don't annotate that stuff and someone else is using, or if they're using a different version of R, you might run into some issues. But the project and everything should still open. I haven't seen any issues with that, but I might just be ignorant to that. But I doubt that.
Yeah, they're not 100% self-contained, the R projects. So yeah, they do rely on those external packages and the external R like package itself. So that will depend on what system you're on. But yeah, all the code, the scripts and the data are basically contained in the project folder.
Your project. Okay. The code. Just send the script. Yeah. Like if you just want to run that script, as long as all the like the packages and everything are fine, the dependencies, then and you have R and Rstudio installed, it'll be fine. Yeah.
But that's what they say. It's the hardest thing in software development is dependency management and cache and validation, but dependency management is like one of the hardest things to do. So
I've had that recently where it's like I was like developing some R scripts to run on the HPC to do some big wrangling of some like massive data sets. And I was just playing around in Rstudio trying to get it set up on a subset and everything works perfectly and it's all gravy. And then I go to run it on the HPC, which has the same version of R installed, what I thought was the same version to Tidyverse, and it doesn't work. And it's just like, it's a pain in the ass. It's definitely something you might not encounter it soon, but you'll encounter it at some point where the versions are just wrong. And it's just a tedious process of troubleshooting and figuring it out. And in this, at some point, I'm sure there is a session on troubleshooting because that's pretty big. And Google is usually your friend, or the Slack channel for code art. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe also we could make a session about how to use Homebrew and Miniconda and Bioconda and all those things
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Yeah.
possible to sort, I guess.
Yeah, so there's so many ways to install things. It's it can be overwhelming. I think it's a good idea to definitely do that.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to do that one more time?
Sure.
Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's the difference between when you're having your script on the R&D file and just as a cost?
So we do, I think one of the last sessions for this is doing R&D, some R Markdown.
I usually do an R Markdown.
I do, well, not everything. If I'm like, when I'm doing like analysis and stuff, I'll use R&D, but sometimes I'll like, if I'm just wrangling big data on the HPC and I use R, then I'll write a script. But I would recommend that for most of us just doing data analysis, we use R Markdown. For the people that haven't got an intro to that yet, we will in subsequent weeks, and you'll see that it can be very powerful and it's a lot easier. So yeah, definitely use R Markdown. It's so much easier for annotating stuff, for versioning, or like, yeah, everything. It's awesome. And then once, like, if you want to be, reproducible or produce, reproducible work, like being able to just knit something to PDF and upload it, right? Or attach it to your publications or have it in your GitHub. Like, it makes life so much easier. Even, I mean, for other people, it's good, but for yourself, following through, coming back to old code in R Markdown is so much easier. For sure. Cool.
Legana was saying that maybe people need to install GitHub.
Before next week.
I don't know. Legana, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just looking at the thing, but I think you might have to make an account on GitHub to install Git. So it might be better if people did it before.
They should be able to install Git without GitHub. I think that will work. But if you want to use, are you going to go through GitHub next week? Or?
There's only a little tiny part because I'm doing 3 different parts.
Yeah, okay.
So there's not much. It doesn't really cover much. So I'm not sure if it's a good idea to include, and we might need an entire session instead on Git. So it's a bit confusing when you're first starting out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a talk on Git that I've written that I could give at some point.
Oh. That's good. Maybe we'll skip the Git next week and then we'll.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't mind. It's always nice because you kind of interact with it a little bit through like looking at least how to search GitHub, right? Like how to find a package on there and how to do the install from GitHub sort of process. Is probably a good thing to go through at least. Yeah, and Saul wants Git, so I don't know. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, we can do a more in-depth Git thing maybe, and then if you just want to touch on it next week, Legana, that'd be cool.
I can put it in the list of topics. So it was dependencies. Cool.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Jacob.
Fun.
Thanks for that. That was great. You yeah, it's a good little intro, I think. Does anyone else have more questions? I think Estefania is still figuring out the R tools problem, but maybe we can move that to the Slack channel to solve that problem.
I think I'm not sure, from memory, I think I may have run into that problem when I first started. I don't think it's not like a package you see, like you have to install Rstudio, RTools, sorry, on your local, like I can't remember how, what the go is, but I think it's something like separate to R, if that makes sense.
Right. Oh,
So you can do it through Rstudio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
it's a pain. But if it should be on Google. Like I'm pretty sure when I Googled it, it was like 1 million people had the same problem.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, everyone always has the same problems with this stuff.
Yeah, that's why I like always think like we're not that special, guys. No offense. We're not doing that like that new age sort of stuff. Like everyone, there's so many other people doing the same. And so if you have any,
yeah, and the one good thing we should run through as well is reading error messages, because a lot of the time error messages sort of like spit out the stuff, and you're like, oh, what is this magic language that it's like saying? But it's very descriptive. You know, those error messages say what's wrong most of the time. Like some are bad, people write bad error messages, but a lot of the time it's like this is the problem, and you sort of just have to like read it very slowly and look through it and say, what is this actually saying?
Yeah, for sure. Martha gave a talk on that when she was still here. You know, it was super handy.
Yeah, maybe she has slides or something we could get.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So under packages, there's some of them are ticked, some aren't ticked. What does that mean? And then like some of these I've never heard of. So I'm like, have I downloaded them without knowing? Or are these ones that I have downloaded?
So if it's ticked, it's loaded. Right? If the packages that are there that you don't think you've installed, there's two things. One, Rstudio comes with a collection of packages that sort of, I'm pretty sure are already installed, right? Hi, Tama? Like it's not just base R, like there'll be other packages. And then another thing is that if you install a particular package, say like the tidyverse, it actually has like 30 like dependencies. So it's dependent on other packages. And you'll start to see that when you start to write your own functions, right? And you start using, say, tidyverse functions within your own function, like that's sort of like a dependency, right? So it's like a certain package requires another package. So when you install it, it'll be like, oh, would you like to install or update these dependencies? And you'll be like, yes. And it will just start like installing all these different packages. So it could be either of those.
And then if you forget that you've installed a package, are you gonna like blow anything up if you download it again? Like
if you install again, it'll try to update it.
Okay.
Yeah. Which
so is it bad
sometimes
just
is a headache.
every day being like, oh, I'm going to install Tidyverse again? Like you've always got. Or is that bad?
No, I would say that's not a good idea. So because you're writing your code based on a certain version, or if you're using multiple packages, certain version of certain packages, right? And it's like, so if you're writing all your stuff in Tidyverse 3.2, but then there's updates in Tidyverse 10 that change the, like, I don't know, the arguments to a particular function or the syntax or whatever, then now your code won't work with that new updated package. So for me, like personally, I update packages not on the regular, essentially, right? And I try to keep track of what versions I'm using. And you can, if you do that, there are ways to install older versions. And so it's something as long as you've had those package versions written.
What's the best way to keep track of the ones you have installed?
I mean, you just
in a diary.
It's all here. So it's like if there's things you use on the regular, then like you will be aware, I guess, that you've already installed them. And if you hadn't, like just try and load it. And if it doesn't load, you don't have it, and you've got to install it. Mm-hmm. Or you can search for up there, top right as well. People don't really have that. So I'm just helping someone. Just so you know, everyone, you can search for packages if you want to, if you've had it, if you have it. Cool. Easy enough. Any other questions?
Is there a way to like output the dependency requirements for a project? Or you just like sort of copy and paste whatever you loaded? I guess it's kind of in the library statement at the top, right? That's kind of where you're saying what dependencies are. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be cool if there was a way. I tend to like write down the versions as well. So it's a pain in the ass. So
it must be. It's like the sort of like a requirements.txt file in Python or something where you can.
Yeah. Okay.
But because if you're making a package in R, you define what requirements or what dependencies you need for the package. But it'd be good if you could just be like, well, I guess you could dump the session info. Yeah, Kevin's got it. There we go. Dump the session info. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
That's cool. So you could just redirect that to a file or something like that, and just call that like requirements or something. And then so anyone else who's like loading your project could be like, oh, this is all the stuff I need.
My Rstudio is shooting itself. So we might tap out at this end because there's another meeting coming in.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone. Thanks for coming along.
Yeah.
We'll
Thank
see you next week.
And
Thank you. And next
good
week,
luck.
Anna.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thanks again, Jacob. It was awesome.